Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Did intelligent life exist before us? Are we truly the first to have built grand civilizations? Today we are going to explore some shocking claims about the pyramids and see what the world was like before the flood. Who built these ancient places? Let's try to figure it out together. Who really built the pyramids? What if I told you the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids? That got your attention. Now this is a shocking claim, so take it with a grain of salt. But historians have recently started to doubt whether the ancient Egyptians really built the Great Pyramids of Giza. Instead, it's looking like the greatest monuments this world has ever seen may have been built by a lost civilization, possibly of alien origin. According to mainstream science, the pyramids of Giza were built around 2500 BC as funerary monuments for dead pharaohs. But historians Jerry Cannon and Malcolm Hutton have offered an alternative theory. They say the pyramids could actually be 12,000 years old. According to their research, all three pyramids and the Sphinx were built before Egyptians even lived in Egypt. In fact, they were built before the Ice Age ended, at a time when there were still creatures like woolly mammoths roaming around. If it wasn't the Egyptians, who was it? Jerry suggested the people who built the pyramids were part of the ancient civilization of Atlantis. But here's the part that's going to rock your world. The theory is that the people of Atlantis came to planet Earth from the stars tens of thousands of years ago. This would be a great sci-fi novel, right? The star travelers established civilization on our world, built great monuments like the pyramids, and then were destroyed by a flood. That would be Noah's flood, the same one spoken of in mythologies across the globe. When the floodwaters receded, only fragments of the original civilization were left. Those fragments went on to begin civilization anew, starting in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt. In that regard, many of our earliest ancestors would have been from Atlantis. It's insane to say this out loud, but there could be some truth to it. For example, did you know there is a direct line from the pyramids in Egypt to a submerged continent off the coast? The pyramids lead directly to a pair of undersea summits that look like the tips of pyramids. There have been suggestions that these are lost underwater pyramids from the days of Atlantis. In a recent interview, Jerry Cannon went on to say that the three smaller pyramids at Giza were likely built by the Egyptians, but probably because they were mimicking the three much larger pyramids left behind by their ancient ancestors. Don't try to talk to any Egyptologist about this because they don't want to hear it. Egyptian authorities have maintained that the Egyptians built the pyramids and that's the end of the story. Jerry said, "The Egyptians have their blinkers on and are against anyone that says anything different." What do you think about this theory? Fun, right? The flying machines of the gods. There are many accounts of ancient gods and their flying machines, and there are even passages in the Bible that talk about flying machines, like this one here, 2 Kings 2:11. It says, "There appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven." Whether you are religious or not, that passage sounds suspiciously like Elijah was sucked up into a vortex that was beamed down from an alien ship. At least that's what ancient alien enthusiasts have to say about it. How would you describe an alien spaceship if you lived during the Old Testament days? You didn't know about aliens or rockets. You would have most likely described it as a chariot of fire. You could excuse this weird passage if it only happened once. But listen to this excerpt from the book of Exodus 13:21. "And Jehovah was going before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them in the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give light to them." This one sounds like God was driving a pillar-shaped vehicle through the sky, which glowed like a flaming pillar in the night. Could the God in the Bible have been an alien in a spaceship? Passages like these appear so often, it's no wonder people are talking about the possibilities. It's very confusing. The argument is that maybe God really is an alien from an ancient civilization. Aliens are here now. What if there was an ancient civilization on this planet before human beings? And what if they haven't left yet? In a new paper that has shocked the scientific community, a team of researchers from Harvard and Montana Technological University have said just that. They have blown the lid off of what might just be the craziest conspiracy out there right now. The team of researchers said there could be intelligent beings concealed in stealth here on Earth, hiding in one of three possible places. Either they are underground, on the moon, or disguised as human beings. The authors of this scientific paper have called these secret alien interlopers crypoterrestrials. That's not even a real word. The scientists admitted that their hypothesis is a little strange. They said even if scientists are skeptical, they should look at their research with genuine consideration. So let's do that. Let's take a deeper look at the research. The Harvard scientists' most insistent claim is that the aliens living among us are remnants of an ancient civilization, one that isn't alien at all, but human. They've suggested a highly advanced human civilization already dominated the planet, but they messed up somehow, and now there are only a handful of them left. They observe us in secret, clutching what little remains of their advanced technology. They've got all of the world in some weird Truman Show, watching us from secret bases. Another of their ideas is that the alien species is alien to us, but not to Earth. They have suggested an intelligent species evolved independently from humans millions of years ago. They have called them intelligent dinosaurs, suggesting a race of reptilian beings are hiding under our very feet. Another option they outlined in their paper is that the hidden occupants are indeed aliens from another planet, maybe even from another time. Last, but certainly not the least believable, scientists said that maybe the creatures are not human or alien. Instead, they might be magical, something more similar to angels than living organic beings. Okay, maybe that is the least believable. The scientists didn't just make all of this stuff up and put it in the scientific paper. They did use real data and quoted actual sources. For example, the paper used quotes from former House Representative Mike Gallagher. Mike recently said that UFO sightings might be technology from an ancient civilization that is suddenly showing itself. And that's from a real representative of the House. Plus, remember that aliens already landed in Las Vegas in 2023 and nobody even batted an eye. The Kenmore family called 911 on April 30th, 2023 and reported something not human in their backyard. Several officers had already spotted a mysterious flashing light in the sky that same night. Experts have confirmed the Las Vegas family's alien encounter video is original. What do you think? Are aliens among us? The non-human megaliths of Siberia. Giants may have lived in Siberia, and I might just have the proof to back it up. There are a series of Siberian megaliths so unbelievable that it's hard to separate fact from fiction. They are called the Gornaya Shoria megaliths, looking like the remains of a humongous fortress wall that was built eons ago. The megaliths can be found at Mountain Shoria in Russia's Kemerovo Oblast. Talking about these megaliths just doesn't do them justice. You have to see them for yourself. You have to look at the perfectly molded stone blocks with your own two eyes, and that way you can see how manufactured they look. The rectangular blocks look like they could have been embedded in the Great Wall of China or in an ancient wall in Peru somewhere. The megaliths look uncannily like the ruins of some ancient piece of architecture. The rocks were identified in the 1990s as natural formations. Scientists have proposed that the megaliths were made by normal geological processes. Things like wind and rain just so happen to shape natural stone into megalith-sized blocks with joints between them. There is no information on how old the megaliths are, nor have there been other ruins found nearby. The megaliths could be tens of thousands of years old or even older. There is just no way to know for certain, and scientists don't seem that interested in finding out. And now for number 8, but first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to Mildred Laware and Cameron Movahead for supporting this channel. You guys are awesome! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The Lost World of Noah. Have you ever wondered what the world looked like before the flood? Let's take a minute to inspect the Bible and see what it says the world was like during antediluvian times. The world was a very different place. There were no snowy Alps or rocky mountains or Himalayas. The Mississippi River didn't flow to the Gulf of Mexico, and there was no sweltering hot Amazon jungle. Everything was different. You can get a glimpse of this world for yourself simply by reading the book of Genesis. The Bible says that on day 3 of God's first work week, he gathered the waters together in one place, separate from dry land. On the land, he created a lovely place called Eden. From Eden, 4 great rivers flowed. What exactly does this mean, though? It seems to suggest that before the flood, there was only one continent. Noah may have stood on some hills overlooking San Francisco, but instead of the San Francisco Bay, he was looking at a chunk of Australia or Antarctica. Creationist Christians believe that before Noah's flood, there was a single supercontinent called Rodinia. It was on this continent that the original civilization created by God lived. When I say original civilization, I mean the one that the flood destroyed. Those would be the ancestors of Noah and the descendants of Adam, along with the Nephilim, the fallen angels, and all the other characters from biblical books like the Book of Enoch. But that's a story for another day. For now, I want to focus on the antediluvian landscape. Creationists believe the flood was so violent and so powerful it shattered Rodinia. The shattered pieces bumped into one another hard enough to create mountains. When everything settled down, much of the original supercontinent was submerged. It's been suggested that our modern continents are only made up of small pieces of the original Earth puzzle. Many of the places where the pre-flood civilization lived are covered in mud at the bottom of the sea. The Winged Genies. The winged genie is an ancient motif from Assyria that you've most likely seen without knowing what you were looking at. You'll never guess the insane meaning behind these ancient creatures, if creatures is even the right word. This is a winged genie. This particular winged genie was carved in 870 BC. Here's another one with 4 wings, holding a pine cone in one hand and a bucket in the other. It was found on the north wall of King Sargon II's palace in Dur-Sharrukin, circa 713 BC. When you see these images online, they are almost always connected with the Anunnaki. Type in Anunnaki into a search engine, and a winged genie is likely the first thing that will pop up. The truth isn't as simple. Winged genies are typically bearded men with bird wings. They were popular in Assyrian artwork, especially in palaces and the homes of royalty. Sometimes the genie can be seen wearing a horned helmet, and sometimes they wear what look like jeweled bracelets or watches. It's believed the winged genie was most closely associated with the ancient Anunnaki god Enki, Lord of Water. Enki was like the proto-version of Poseidon. Historically, Anunnaki were deities from Mesopotamia, worshipped by the cultures of the Akkadians, Assyrians, Sumerians, and Babylonians. It was like the pantheon of gods on Mount Olympus to the Greeks. Each civilization saw the Anunnaki a little differently. In Akkad, the Anunnaki were the descendants of An and Ki. Get it? Anunnaki? They were the oldest primordial gods. Their whole function was to determine the fates of humanity. In the Old Babylonian period between 1830 and 1530 BC, a new group of deities emerged. They were called the Igigi, believed to be the 6th generation of gods. One of the similarities across the ancient cultures of Mesopotamia was that they saw the Anunnaki as real living beings. They weren't mythical entities living in a shadow realm. They were physical gods on Earth. Each generation bred new gods. The Igigi came along and were supposed to perform menial labor tasks for the primary Anunnaki, but they didn't want to. And after 40 days, they rebelled against the god Enki, Enki the winged genie. This is all according to ancient myth. When the Igigi rebelled against Enki, that was when the Anunnaki created human beings as their slaves. Breeding gods was too dangerous, with the gods being too unruly and hard to control. The Anunnaki needed a better workforce, so they made people. The ancient stories of winged genie, Anunnaki, and biologically engineered human slaves point to the possibility of civilization before humanity. If the myths are to be believed, the Anunnaki used Homo erectus and in vitro fertilization to create modern humans to mine their precious metals. But is this the true myth, or is this sci-fi? A lot of this has been blended together in modern times thanks to writers like Zecharia Sitchin and David Icke. It's been said that when the Ice Age ended and the world flooded, the Anunnaki bases on Earth were destroyed. Only then were humans able to rise up against them, destroy the God Kings, and start their own civilization. What do you think? Are you a fan of this Anunnaki myth sci-fi world? Let me know in the comments. The secrets of Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku might be an antediluvian city, a real one built before the start of human civilization as we know it. If this can be proven, history will be forever changed. If you haven't heard of Tiwanaku before, you're in for a treat. This ancient city was at the center of almost every major civilization in Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. Its remains can be found near the edge of Lake Titicaca. These days, some of the most unexplainable ruins are located near Tiwanaku. Places like Pumapunku, the Gate of the Sun, the Acapana Pyramid, the Temple of Kalasaysaya, all archaeological sites that defy logical explanation. Tiwanaku translates in the ancient language of the Tiwanaku culture as City of God. Let me make it clear how old Tiwanaku is. When the Inca came to power roughly 5 centuries ago, the city was already legendary. The original civilization that built the city had been gone for thousands of years. The Inca viewed the extinct Tiwanaku culture like we view the ancient Egyptians today. What happened to Tiwanaku is hugely mysterious. Archaeologists have never been able to fully understand why the city was destroyed or when, but they have found evidence of a cataclysm. Buildings have been discovered torn to shreds, as if blown apart by missiles. Streets and temples have been found fragmented and buried under thick layers of mud. When I say thick, I mean more than 60 feet thick. This all happened in ancient times. How ancient is the million-dollar question? Tiwanaku was slowly rebuilt after its destruction, becoming a village at the edge of Lake Titicaca. But then it was abandoned abruptly and for unknown reasons in 1000 AD. Some consider Tiwanaku the oldest city in the world, even older than the ruins of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. This isn't confirmed, it's only suspected. One of the first experts to put forward the theory was renowned archaeologist Arthur Poznański. Arthur was a prolific writer, researcher, and explorer. In 1896, he moved to South America at the young age of 23. He explored the far reaches of the Amazon River, ended up moving to Bolivia, and became obsessed with Tiwanaku. In the 1940s, Arthur began to make claims that Tiwanaku was built prior to the flood. He thought construction of the ancient city began when the Ice Age was still in full swing. Arthur was so convinced of his theory that he published a book in 1945 claiming that Tiwanaku was 17,000 years old. He also claimed it was not built by the ancestors of modern people living in the region known as the Aymara. Instead, Arthur believed Tiwanaku was built by an origin civilization. It was from the towering stone walls of Tiwanaku that Arthur believed all the civilizations of the Americas began, including the Maya and the Aztec. Later scholars and scientists rejected Arthur's ideas. But what makes living scientists so sure they are the ones who are right? Arthur didn't make his claims based on nothing. He spent 40 years excavating Tiwanaku, studying every brick and astronomical alignment to learn more of how they viewed the cosmos. All of Arthur's studies pointed to one explanation. Tiwanaku was built by a prehistoric culture with an incredible understanding of celestial bodies, architecture, and time itself. Egypt's antediluvian temple. Tiwanaku might be one of the oldest cities ever built, but the Egyptian city of Abydos is without a doubt, archaeologically confirmed, one of the earliest cities in Egypt, and it's home to a place of immense power. By about 7,400 years ago, Abydos was a thriving settlement. By 3400 BC, the pre-dynastic rulers of Abydos were building shrines and mortuaries. Fast forward to the 13th century BC, Pharaoh Seti I constructed a massive temple with floor-to-ceiling friezes and beautiful murals. Only Seti I may not have been the first one to build a temple at the exact spot where his temple currently stands. The temple, known as the Osirion, might be way older. Some think a temple has been standing in this part of the Egyptian desert since antediluvian times. It's been reused and renovated by civilization after civilization. In other words, the Osirion is a place of power, a place that radiates such intense energy that people continuously use it as somewhere special, like a temple or a church. To understand this antediluvian hypothesis, let's take a look back in time. 12,000 years ago, North Africa didn't look anything like what it does now. Egypt itself was unrecognizable. It was wetter, greener, and there was an inland sea that drained into the Atlantic. All that lush greenery was annihilated almost instantly when Noah's flood struck. Ancient historian Diodorus of Sicily wrote that it disappeared from sight in the course of an earthquake, when those parts of it which lay toward the ocean were torn asunder. The green paradise of Egypt was swallowed, and all that was left behind was a desert. If there really was a cataclysmic event that changed Egypt so rapidly, it's safe to say that many of the original buildings were lost. Maybe there were thousands of temples that were washed away in the flood and have never been found. This could explain why it's been alleged that there is water damage to the Sphinx. The Sphinx could have narrowly avoided being washed away with the rest of pre-Pharaoh Egypt. The Osirion is built of gigantic rose granite pillars. The pillars are unique for two main reasons. One reason is that they are completely devoid of carvings and inscriptions. Unlike most blocks in Egyptian temples that are covered in hieroglyphs, the Osirion is as bare as a white padded cell. The other reason for its uniqueness is that it shouldn't technically exist. Some of the pillars weigh up to 100 tons. I don't think I need to explain to you that 100 tons is 1 ton too many. There is no realistic way the ancient Egyptians transported such big granite pillars to Abydos in the desert from Aswan near the border of Nubia. The ancient temple also has stylistic differences. Although it is clearly an Egyptian temple, it doesn't fit into the thematic scheme of other Egyptian temples from the reign of Seti II. It's completely unique, lending credibility to the theory that it predates Egypt. But if it predates Egypt, and if it was only repurposed by Seti rather than built from scratch, what originally stood here? And who built it in the first place? Evidence of Noah's biblical flood. There might just be proof of a pre-flood civilization hidden underwater, just like the creationist Christians say. I have information from one of the most renowned underwater archaeologists in the world to back it up. His name is Robert Ballard. More than 10 years ago, Robert and his team were scanning the depths of the Black Sea in search of lost civilizations. They were hoping to find evidence of humans who were alive at the same time as Noah. Dive around and find out. Lo and behold, they found what they were looking for. Robert already had an excellent track record when it came to finding the impossible. His name might sound familiar because Robert Ballard was the one who found the Titanic in 1985 at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. In 2012, he had even more sophisticated technology. He used that advanced tech to find biblical evidence of a global catastrophe. As you may know already, the Ice Age was a real thing. Watch any of the Ice Age movies and you'll know it for a fact. If you lived in Connecticut 12,000 years ago, the ice would have been a mile above your head. There was an ice cube that stretched from Connecticut to the North Pole, a very big ice cube. As it started to melt, the world started to flood. Water from the melting glaciers rushed toward the oceans, causing flooding around the world. There is no debating that this would have been the mother of all floods. While scientists generally agree it happened, finding irrefutable evidence has been tough. That was what drew Robert to the Black Sea region. He was also drawn by a rumor. A controversial theory was proposed by a pair of Columbia University scientists. The theory stated that the Black Sea was initially a small freshwater lake surrounded by prehistoric farms. These were farms that may have belonged to a civilization 7,000 years older than the Egyptians, or maybe 27,000 years older. There's no way of knowing. At the end of the Ice Age, a surge of water more than 200 times stronger than Niagara Falls swept over those farms, destroying everything. The civilization was wiped out, and the small lake turned into an epic sea. This was the theory that Robert really wanted to prove. 400 feet beneath the surface, Robert found that proof. He and his team uncovered evidence of an apocalyptic-level event. They found an ancient shoreline with shells scattered along it. The shoreline had been battered by a violent flood. Based on the radiocarbon dating of the shells, that flood happened 7,000 years ago. Unfortunately, Robert didn't find any physical ruins. No castles or palaces or cities were discovered buried under the muck. He only found a submerged shoreline from a time when the Black Sea was a small lake. Robert wasn't able to prove a pre-flood civilization existed, but he definitely proved there was a massive flood, just like the Bible says. The Great Wall of Texas. I can't think of a more aptly named American city than Rockwall, Texas. Underneath the city is an actual rock wall, one that has been a source of speculation and controversy for the last 160 years. The American people demand answers. Was Rockwall's rock wall built by prehistoric people, or is it natural? Was Texas home to a civilization before humans? There have been roughly 12 discoveries of the rock wall underneath the town. What I mean is that people have found fragments of the ancient structure on about a dozen different documented occasions. The Rockwall County Historical Foundation has been keeping track of the discoveries, with the first one recorded in 1852. To this day, the entire stretch of the wall has never been excavated. Even the places where fragments would have been found don't seem to form any pattern. When looking at the spots on a map, they are just random dots and dashes. People have mostly found the wall by accident, when plowing a field or digging a new well. People have had better luck finding fragments of wall without looking than those who have actively excavated. Okay, but what is it? In 1901, Dr. Robert T. Hill argued that the wall is nothing but a sandstone dike. Geologist Dr. John Gleesman at the University of Texas more recently studied the formation and agreed with the initial assessment. The Colorado Geological Survey agrees as well. They said the wall was formed by a seam of sedimentary material, stuff like sand and silt collected in a fissure over millions of years, then dried to look like an artificial wall. These experts did admit that the formations in Rockwall are unique, specifically because when the materials dried and fractured, it did so in a way that made the wall look as if it were put together symmetrically using bricks. Have you ever seen this before? If you've been to Rockwall, Texas, you absolutely must let me know in the comments. I want to hear your observations. Not everyone is convinced with the explanation given by modern scientists. There are some pretty suspect things here to make you scratch your head. Here's something that's very suspicious. There have been bits of iron, a small metal disc, and other out-of-place artifacts found during excavations of wall sections. These unidentified relics point to the wall being made by human hands. Or someone's hands, at least. Atlantis in Indonesia. Atlantis is not where you might expect. A group of researchers from Indonesia recently claimed that they found proof Atlantis sank into the Java Sea of Southeast Asia. They supposedly know the exact location of the city. It's 200 miles from the southern coast of Java. So, if Atlantis is found, why aren't more scientists talking about it? The way the team reached their conclusion wasn't as scientific as you might hope. The group calls themselves Turanga Seta. They found Atlantis by looking at old myths, geological anomalies, and other clues of that nature. The founder of the group is Timmy Hartadi, a guy who has earned himself the nickname the Indonesian Indiana Jones. Vice correspondents traveled to Timmy's home in Yogyakarta to learn more about his mysterious group and their discovery of Atlantis. Timmy revealed that the group began when some like-minded people felt unsatisfied with the version of history they were taught in school. They believed that there is more to history than the books are telling us. In 2011, Timmy and his group claimed that they identified a pyramid hidden inside Indonesia's Mount Lalakon. The government immediately rejected their findings, and the Indonesian Scientific Institute released a statement distancing themselves from Turanga Seta. Timmy was even denounced by the National Archaeological Board as a pseudoscientist. That didn't stop him from doing his research. Timmy still maintains that the pyramid in Mount Lalakon is almost 1,000 feet tall, more than twice as tall as the Great Pyramid of Giza. Timmy said the pyramid is one of many sites in Indonesia where there is more than meets the eye. If Timmy and his team are to be believed, Indonesia was home to an ancient society that predates every known civilization. Their monuments are buried underneath volcanoes and mountains. Atlantis itself is just off the coast of Java. As exciting as this all is, and I kind of like the idea just for fun, Timmy hasn't produced any reliable evidence. If he could just come up with some artifacts or some images of underwater ruins, he might change history. The Antediluvian Kings. The people who lived on Earth before modern humans lived for nearly 1,000 years each. How did they do it? And were they even human? In the opening chapters of the book of Genesis, there is information about the ages of all the biblical patriarchs who lived during antediluvian times. The 10 patriarchs of Genesis lived for a combined total of 8,575 years. The average age of somebody living before the flood was 858 years. Don't you wonder what people did to fill the time? It's one thing to live for 800 years with the internet. The Bible is not the only place where you see evidence of an ancient civilization that lived seemingly forever. The Sumerian king list is something I've talked about a few times, but it never gets old. This ancient document from Mesopotamia contains the names of 8 mythical kings who ruled the world for 241,200 years. The average reign of a Sumerian god-king was 30,150 years. Although the Sumerian god-kings had more impressive lives than the biblical patriarchs, you can still see parallels between the two mythologies. They both lived for ages. The Sumerian king list predates the Bible by a lot. It was discovered in Larsa, Iraq, and is 4,000 years old. What makes it so amazing is that the list contains the names of real kings who lived for reasonably long lives, less than a century. But it also has those initial god kings who ruled for an eternity. There is one part of the king list you might not know. At the very end of the list, it says that after the flood, the kings ruled from Kish. Kish was a real city founded around 3100 BC. The list is a blend of reality and fiction. But what if it isn't? What if everything on the list is true? Maybe the world really was ruled by some godlike beings. Perhaps the stories in the Bible and in ancient Sumer were based on real life. Do you think a race of god kings lived on Earth for thousands of years before human civilization started? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching! Don't forget to subscribe and stick around for an older video you might have missed.
Prehistoric temples. The prehistoric people who lived in what is today Malta were some of the best temple builders of their time. One of the greatest examples of their advanced techniques still around today is the Nidra complex. This ancient temple joined astrology with architecture in one of the best representations of an ancient observatory. At the equinoxes in March and September, the sunrise perfectly illuminates the central corridor in the South Temple. And during the solstices in June and December, the sunrise lines up perfectly as well. Somehow, the builders of this temple knew exactly which parts of the structure they wanted to be illuminated during the solstices and the equinoxes, and which parts they wished to remain dark. In other words, not only did they have advanced knowledge of the stars, but also of building. This is especially impressive when you remember that Malta was a chieftain society. They built this temple way back in 3600 BC, over 5,000 years ago. Back then, the people here were ruled by a class of priests rather than an actual system of government. They even installed small vertical holes where light would slip through in the temple, likely as a primitive calendar that tracked the seasons. Experts believe the builders probably had to work at night and use this star cluster called Pleiades as a type of rough guide, making sure all their structures were lining up perfectly. However they managed, this structure is a feat of incredibly advanced ancient engineering. Ancient air conditioning. Air conditioning came about in its modern form in 1902, but for thousands of years before that, people still enjoyed air conditioning. They just did it in a very different way. For example, it's believed that the ancient Egyptians were the first ones to experiment with cooling their homes. When the Egyptians were dealing with scorching temperatures, which was most of the time, they would hang wet mats over their doorways. This might sound kind of silly, but it's pretty scientific. When the water from the wet mats evaporated, heat got sucked out of the house. The primitive yet ingenious method also added moisture to the air, which helped to cool people down in the extremely dry climate. In the Roman Empire, air conditioning became even more advanced. The wealthiest of the Romans used their aqueducts to circulate cold, fresh water through pipes inside the walls of their houses. This was extremely effective at keeping the inside of their homes much cooler than outside. For those who couldn't afford these cold water pipes, they were forced to congregate at public baths to stay cool. But if we go a little further in time, the Han Dynasty also had a unique take on air conditioning. From 200 BC until 220 AD, the White Horse Temple had its own cooling hall, where rotary fans powered by water kept the elite members of society cool during the summer. And finally, Persians built wind towers to keep themselves cool. These towers had windows that allowed air to sweep through, pushing colder air into people's houses and sucking warmer air out. Maya Water Treatment System. Scientists investigating the Maya city of Tikal, deep in the jungle of Guatemala, have found evidence of an ancient water treatment system. The Maya were using a mineral called zeolite to treat water much like we do today with fluoride. They poured this mineral into a special treatment system to filter any kind of harmful organisms or toxic elements from the water supply. As far as scientists are concerned, this is the oldest known example of water treatment anywhere in North America. Scientists made the amazing discovery by collecting sediment cores from 3 different drinking water reservoirs. These reservoirs stored water from between 2200 and 1100 years ago, including during the peak of Tikal, when it had about 60,000 residents. All those people were drinking from the reservoirs placed around the city. The mineral analysis of the sediment samples showed the presence of zeolite, which scientists know today is capable of trapping contaminants in drinking water. It's even used in some of the most modern water purification systems. But how in the world did people 2,000 years ago know about a mineral that could trap chemicals in water? We're not entirely sure, but we do know, thanks to scientists from the University of Cincinnati, that the zeolite was taken from a mineral deposit about 19 miles from the city. The main theory scientists have now is that the Maya knew that the water found near the zeolite source was a lot healthier than the stuff they had in their reservoirs. They realized that by taking the zeolite deposits and using them in Tikal, they could make their own water purer and safer to drink. An ancient well. An ancient well found in the Czech Republic may just be the oldest piece of surviving wooden architecture anywhere in the world. It survived for 7,200 years because it spent most of that time underwater, away from oxygen. The well itself is lined with oak. It was found beside a Czech motorway back in 2018, and it only goes about 4.5 feet deep. Researchers are still struggling to figure out its history, but it's pretty clear that this advanced piece of technology may have been one of the very first wooden wells ever made. To understand when the well came from, an archaeological team analyzed the rings found in the wood and radiocarbon dated the material. The well was made from oak trees in 5255 BC. This was near the end of the Neolithic period, a time when humans first started farming. According to the analysis of the structure, whoever built this thing had a shockingly sophisticated understanding of technology. It actually looks more like something that the Romans would have built some 5,000 years later. And to make things even more bizarre, nobody has any idea how the farmers managed to create such an advanced structure. To us, it's just a wooden well that farmers use to gather water. But it would have required precision craftsmanship and complicated tools that Neolithic people simply didn't have. Remember, these guys were using rock tools. They were hardly even out of the Stone Age and were still carving axes from animal horns. How do you think primitive Europeans over 7,000 years ago figured out how to make a well of the same quality the Romans were building much later? Let me know any theories you might have in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before you leave. Central heating. Central heating was just one of the great inventions thought up by the ancient Greeks. Believe it or not, the Greeks were the first people to implement indoor heating, with other cultures copying and adding more innovations later. The Greeks used fire for their central heating system. They figured out how to push heat from a fire through pipes into different rooms inside of a certain building. The pipes would be hidden under the floor so that the heat would radiate up, keeping their feet nice and toasty. It would also fill the room with pleasant heat, just like any house today that has underfloor heating. It's really the same concept that we use today. The only major difference is that with the ancient Greeks, the fire needed to be constantly maintained. This tedious task was usually given to the household slaves. Back then, central heating wasn't totally without its victims. The first structures. The earliest human building project ever has been discovered deep in a French cave. Neanderthal builders lived in the region a very long time ago. We just talked about a well that was over 7,000 years old, but these structures go back 175,000 years ago. That's actually 100,000 years before modern humans came to exist in Europe. Keep in mind just how old these structures are. Archaeologists found that Neanderthals yanked over 400 stalagmites from the ceiling of the cave and then stacked them on top of each other to produce what could be the very first walls ever made by humanoid hands. It really was just as simple as a wall, just a few layers of stalagmites wedged to form a barrier about 21 feet across. But still, it shows that even before humans evolved into humans, we were setting our sights on greatness, and maybe privacy. According to archaeologist Marie Soresi, this wall is different from anything the experts have ever seen before. Nobody is quite sure what the structure was used for, though parts of it were found blackened from heat. This has led some to suspect that Neanderthals may have been trying to embed fireplaces in the walled structure, both to keep themselves warm and to illuminate the cave and stave off the darkness. The Cloaca Maxima. The Cloaca Maxima is by far the best example of a sewer system used by ancient Rome. In fact, it's been called the greatest sewer system in the world, continuously in use since the 6th century BC. Back then, it was an effective water drainage system for the city of Rome. So effective and so great that they literally named it Cloaca Maxima, or the greatest sewer. Today, this is one of the oldest monuments in the city, although it doesn't really attract tourists like the Colosseum or the Pantheon. It was built during the reign of Tarquinius Priscus, originally intended for emptying marshlands and carrying stormwater out of the center of the city into the river Tiber. 300 years after its inception, it became a sewage system as waste from public baths and latrines were redirected through the Cloaca Maxima. The sewer system continued to expand under the rule of Augustus Caesar in the 1st century. He expanded the system to include the flow from 11 major aqueducts. Parts of the sewer were restored during the Renaissance. In 2012, robots inspected its interior, and today there is extensive maintenance being done so that it can continue being used. Bringing water to the desert. A team of archaeologists in the remote highlands of Yemen have discovered evidence of an ancient irrigation system from 5,200 years ago. This is direct proof of advanced irrigation techniques from a time when human beings were transitioning from hunting and herding to settling down and growing crops. And this wasn't just one piece of an irrigation system. The members of the archaeological team discovered 174 ancient irrigation structures. According to Michael Harrower from the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto, the earliest farmers in the region of Wadi Sana faced massive environmental challenges. There was barely enough water for them to grow crops. So they managed themselves to develop hydrology techniques to capture water runoff from summer monsoons. With these techniques, they succeeded in transforming the desert into a lush oasis. And while irrigation systems might sound pretty boring, the truth is that by bringing water to the desert, these people were able to eat food grown as a result of regular water access and prosper. This meant huge and powerful ancient cities rose up around irrigation technologies. If it wasn't for irrigation, the most impressive ancient civilizations of the Middle East may have never existed. Who invented the compass? One of the greatest inventions of all time is also one of the most overlooked. I'm talking about the compass, a pretty mundane device these days. And if you don't quite know how a compass works, I'll quickly explain it. The compass consists of a magnetic needle that, when placed horizontally, will automatically point itself at the magnetic field of the Earth, directed north to south. It was the Han Dynasty in China that first learned how to use the Earth's magnetic fields to develop their own compasses. This was around the 1st century AD, but they didn't use it for navigation right away. At first, it was used for all kinds of hocus pocus, like divination, geomancy, and fortune telling. It wasn't for some time that people learned it could also be used to orient yourself and for navigation. The Chinese made their earliest compasses out of lodestone, a type of mineral magnetite. In fact, the very first compass ever was literally a lump of the stone tied to a rope and left hanging. The compass, as we know it today, more or less, wasn't used until the 11th century by the Chinese military for navigational purposes. And from there, the compass quickly spread into Europe. It dramatically improved the world of sailing, since now the captain actually knew where his ship was going. Ships could now sail all year without having to rely on the sun and stars for orientation. Conquering the world with roads, the first major road in the world was the Appian Way, developed by the Romans in 312 BC. It was used as a supply route between the Republic of Rome and its allies in Capua, while Rome was knee-deep in the Second Samnite War. But the Appian Way worked so well that building roads became wildly important to the Roman Empire, and one of the main reasons for their success. As the Roman legions burned a trail through Europe, they built highways to link all their captured cities with their capital of Rome. This is where the saying, "all roads lead to Rome," come from. Because when roads first came into existence, they all literally led back to Rome. Soldiers could move very quickly, traders could follow the roads from town to town, and the world was propelled blindingly fast into the age of globalization. But the Romans also made their roads incredibly well. The design was impressive, with retaining walls on either side of the road and 3-foot trenches. The bottom section was made of leveled earth or sand, then a layer of small stones, a foundation of crushed rock and gravel, and a surface layer of hard blocks made from either gravel or volcanic lava. And yes, many of these roads still exist today. The one I just told you about at the beginning, the Appian Way, is still around right now and almost perfectly preserved. Roman roads were even used up until the 19th century in a lot of places in Europe. The Fosse Way in Britain is still used by bikes and foot traffic, while many Roman roads line the sides of modern highways. Thanks for watching! What do you think was the most impressive ancient technology? Let me know in the comments below. I'm pretty impressed by the water filtration system of the Maya. For more great content, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!